factors should be taken into account when deciding which model is good for our country. Probably Windows model is not the right way of doing the business, and of course evolutionary approach to Islamic banking implementation should be adopted. Very good points, and we go to Kamal. Your 2 minutes.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I agree with the approach which is suggested by Neil that it has to be evolutionary. I think we have seen already a few examples that if you try to implement Islamic banking overnight without having the proper infrastructure, without having the human resources developed, without having people educated, because people, I mean customers end of the day are the key component, you fail in that. And then what you end up with is, so quote unquote people think that Islamic banking failed, as if there's something wrong with the concept or its implementation in the 21st century. I think that's very important for Oman to also keep in mind, because failure will not be considered failure of me as a banker who did not do his job. Failure will be considered something wrong with maybe the concept, something wrong with maybe its practical application. The fact remains that's not the case. It is the approach which we have taken maybe was not the right approach. And we have now, mashallah, the benefit to Oman is that we have all the examples already implemented with some results. We have Malaysian model, we have Pakistan model, kind of reinvented Pakistan model. And then we have Saudi model, I mean the country where I come from. And the model used in Saudi Arabia also have very good lessons to learn. Another thing which I would bring in to be very brief is that a lot of these activities are left to the private sector for the good reasons, to develop, to compete, to evolve, to bring better products and so forth. But regulators also have very important role, which I see not a lot of regulators have. Regulators or the other government bodies have really worked on that, is the consumer education. Is the education of the end users of these products and services. Because most of the people who walk into the bank, their experience with the bank either is none, because they never banked, because they didn't like the conventional banking, or they have been used to conventional banking, things done in a certain form and manner. And the moment they see something different, they become kind of skeptical. It's very interesting that you come up with various kind of then feedback from the customers. Some think it's not Islamic because it looks like conventional, and something why it has to be so difficult and different because it is Islamic. So it's kind of varying degree, and that's where you see that the regulator or the government or the other government bodies, they have a very important role to play to educate the consumers as well. So my kind of take on this would be all the approaches are good approaches as long as they are implemented with a long-term view. Yes. The end has to be very much in sight. It's not basically people demand it, so just give them and then forget about it. That is actually going to backfire and have a bad name for maybe the industry itself. So we have to have a long-term approach, and we have to invest in all three segments: the consumers, the regulation, and the central banks. At the same time, enable the industry to do what they are asked to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kamal. Basically, evolution, long-term view, and a very active role to be played by the regulator, not in terms of consumer protection, but awareness and education about Islamic banking and finance as well. We have Mr. Salimullah Khan over here from State Bank of Pakistan. He would share, his initial preliminary views in 2 minutes on the topic.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Very good afternoon. Just to build upon what Kamal has said, that the policymakers, the regulators should have a long-term view and should really know with full clarity that what they really wanted to do with the Islamic banking initiative. Why, for example, if Oman is initiating and allowing the creation and establishment of Islamic banks in this country, what is the longer-term objective? Is it just the financial inclusion that, oh yes, there are a segment of the population which is not doing banking, so let's have another type of banking so that we could include those people as well in the banking system. This would be a sort of a myopic approach. But if the approach is that we are appreciating the real value and the real benefits available in the Islamic economic system, and the longer term view is that slowly and gradually, through an evolutionary process, we would be reaching to a destination which is a real economic system, real Islamic economic system, which is based on social justice, which is based on ethical values, and which is ensuring broad-based prosperity amongst the masses. So if that is the longer-term view, then this Islamic banking would be one of the components of that overall Islamic economic system. And then we could decide that how to strategize to reach to that ultimate direction, say 20 years from now or 30 years from now. It should be a longer-term view towards that. It should not be the case that, as Kamal said, okay, there is a certain segment which is demanding, let's satisfy that segment. That would be sort of a half-hearted attempt. And I'm sorry that I don't think that that would be a successful approach. Another very important thing which has earlier been touched is that what are the demographics? What is the overall cultural dynamics and demography of that country? One model doesn't suit all the demographies. We'll have to see that what is the real market dynamics in a particular jurisdiction. And then based on that assessment, we could come up with a kind of model that would be best suitable for that particular jurisdiction. So the approach should be evolutionary and with a longer term view, not a view that a partial and half-hearted attempt. And then we should have a very clear understanding of the dynamics and of the demographies of that jurisdiction. That would dictate the model we should adopt.
Very good. No, it's a very valid point. Islamic banking and finance should be looked at within an Islamic economic system. Now, this is one of the reasons, when we were deliberating to give a name to this forum, there are different names, Oman Islamic Finance Forum, Oman Islamic Banking Forum, but we prefer to have Oman Islamic Economic Forum because we believe that the real value of Islamic banking and finance will come up only within a complete Islamic economic system. Okay. And from a regulator, we are listening that, Noel, if we look at Islamic banking and finance within that context, then the approach would be very, very different. And of course, this will be a very long-term approach. And if you take a long-term approach, then all these models, okay, they are relevant at different stages. Yes. The best example is Malaysia, where they had one bank. Then they allowed conventional banks to start developing windows, branches, and then they came to a stage where Islamic banking, retail banking is offered by only fully fledged Islamic banks and so on. I would not say much. We have Sheikh Mudassir Siddiqui with us, and he would share his thoughts first 2 minutes, and of course we'll come back to the issue in some detail.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. There is a statement in Arabic which says, Ittaqullah mastata'tum. Fear Allah to the extent it is possible. So the question is not really which one is ideal for Oman, but what is ideal today. And my colleagues have already talked about an evolutionary approach towards changing the system. The other thing I would like to say is, and I agree with that, that things should not be abruptly changed, that things take their time, course, and then eventually, inshallah, the aim should be for a complete Islamization of not just Islamic finance system, but the whole way of life. Inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati lillah. Everything in life must be in accordance with the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, so from a regulator's point of view, and we saw today a very good example of Mithaq coming into existence, which was very refreshing. Now, then you have the consumer perspective. And the consumer perspective is, if I may use an example, that if you have a restaurant which only serves halal meal, and there is a restaurant which has all kind of meals, halal and not halal, you would prefer to go to a halal bit just to make sure that by accident something which is not permissible you ends up on your plate. So from a consumer point of view, of course, there will be a desire to deal with a complete Islamic system. Inshallah, there will be some Islamic system and the Islamic bank that will come into existence. There is already one, Nizwa Bank, alhamdulillah, which is, I understand, is going into operation next year. So let the people make the decision. On the Central Bank Sharia Board, which Brother Qaridi mentioned the issue, I am for it. There should be a Central Sharia Board because it will harmonize and standardize and clarify many things which cannot happen if every Sharia Board is deciding on its own in various Islamic financial institutions. So that's a very important thing. Also in the area of Sharia governance, I will make a distinction between the governance aspects, which will make sure that the institution operates in an Islamic way, as opposed to the products, Sharia compliance. So in the area of governance, I think this step should be taken very immediately to make sure that no one hold himself out as a seller or provider of Islamic financial services unless they have a Sharia board. And there are several examples of the Sharia boards. For example, Malaysia has taken a very good step recently by increasing the size of the Sharia board from 3 Sharia scholars and requiring that in addition to 3 Sharia scholars, there should be 2 in the area of banking or who are familiar or expert in the area of banking or law or other which are very much related to the product development. In the area of product development, we have very good basis in the standards which are being provided by OIEF, but they are not tested. And in the court cases that I have seen so far where they have been tested, we are finding some issues there. For example, there is sometimes the lack of harmony between substance and the form of the contract which has been used. Sometimes the Sharia requirements are such that in practice those cannot be implemented. For example, if you are true to the implementation of the Sharia requirements of OIEF in the area of sukuk, then they must be all asset backed. There should be real ownership, and there is no market for it. So there are some difficulties. I think we have to wait before. And we also see that some practices which are found in the marketplace, they have been allowed as a makharij, a temporary solution. So if you solidify them in the form of a legislation, then a makhraj can become a hukm, a permanent solution, and that should not become a norm. So let the product area evolve and find ways through improved contracts which reflect the reality of the relationship between the customers. And inshallah, time will come when that can also be legislated and regulated.
Excellent. That's very good, actually. Now, I like this. Islamic banking should be part of an Islamic financial lifestyle, which in turn should lead to an Islamic lifestyle. That's very good. Oliver?
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum and good morning. I guess I'd like to talk about the basics that delve into this question. And the basics are that Islamic finance is not just about making money. Islamic finance is about conducting one's financial affairs, as Mudassir just noted, with due respect for Sharia and with due respect for the fundamental rules that Muslims have to abide by. Now, if we take that perspective, then I think, to me, it matters less whether or not you have a window, whether you have an annex, whether you have a separate house. Bottom line is there conformity and is there compliance or not? And I think this is critical. And I think as the Islamic finance industry develops and grows, there are sort of important challenges that it faces in reflecting the genuineness of its products. Because it's very important because, you know, there's a big difference between grape juice and wine. We can drink grape juice, but we can't drink wine. And we all know what one has to do to prevent or stop it at the point where you can actually still drink the grape juice. There is no such thing as Sharia-compliant alcohol. There are certain products that will never be Sharia-compliant. So I think in the context of the overall economic paradigm and Sharia finance, it's very important to remember that the goal of Islamic banking is to make money, but to make it in conformity with the Sharia. And we believe in Islamic banking that there's plenty of opportunity to do this. But I think it's very, very important that the principal spiritual perspective is always sort of adhered to. And I think, therefore, in my opinion, even if you have a conventional, if you have a window, even in a conventional institution that is properly segregated, that is conducted completely in conformity with a regulatory structure that has a very sort of delineated system of compliance, I don't have a specific issue with that. Because again, at the end of the day, it's whether or not something meets the test. And I think that's where the regulators and where the government has to take very strong action. Just quickly, in Dubai, where our law firms are based, and in Abu Dhabi, we're seeing all sorts of issues coming up on contracts that were previously negotiated and entered into between parties. Because there's a huge difference between the actual contracts that were agreed and what's enforceable. So I think it's very important that there's a regulatory infrastructure that sets forth the laws, the rights and remedies, and therefore all the market participants can develop and understand Islamic finance in an easier context.
That's very good. Well, we heard the members of the panel